It was a quiet, chilly night in 1991 when something unimaginable shattered a peaceful home in a small Midwest town. 8-year-old Emily Carter had just been tucked into bed by her mother, her favorite cassette toy resting by her side like always. It was one of those ordinary routines that made a house feel like home. A kiss on the forehead, a gentle goodnight, and a hallway light left on just enough to make the dark less scary. But by morning, everything had changed. Emily was gone. Her bedroom window showed no signs of being forced open. There were no footprints, no evidence of a break-in, and no sounds were heard during the night. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. One moment, her mother was saying goodnight. The next, her bed was empty, and the toy cassette recorder lay untouched on the floor. Police were called, search teams combed the area. Dogs, helicopters, neighbors all joined the effort. But nothing ever turned up. No ransom note, no eyewitnesses. Just silence. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. And soon, the case of the missing little girl slipped out of the headlines and into the realm of cold files. Her mother, Linda Carter, never stopped looking. While others tried to move on or forget, she kept Emily's room just as it was. The small shoes remained lined up under the bed. The posters on the wall never came down. Her favorite stuffed animals, dusty and untouched, kept their silent watch. Every birthday, Linda lit a candle. Every Christmas, she left a small gift under the tree. It wasn't denial, it was hope, stubborn and fierce, the kind only a mother could understand. The town whispered. Some believed Emily had wandered off. Others thought maybe someone close to the family had been involved. A few even believed something darker, something unexplainable had happened that night, but no one could say for sure. And over time, people stopped asking questions. Except Linda. 9 years passed. In those years, the world moved on. Technology evolved. The cassette tapes and clunky toys of the early 90s became relics in dusty boxes. Linda eventually had to move to a smaller home, but she took every box marked Emily with her. She said she couldn't let go. She, WOULDN, single quotes. Then came the day everything changed again. It started simply enough, just a rainy Sunday afternoon. It's a kind that makes you clean out closets you haven't touched in years. Linda was sorting through one of Emily's old moving boxes when she found it. That same red and Danilo plastic toy cassette recorder Emily used to play with constantly. The handle was still wrapped in that familiar yellow coiled cord, and the play button was half stuck like it always had been. For a moment, Linda just held it. Her hands trembled a bit, but not from fear, just from the weight of memory. Without really thinking, she popped in one of the old tapes that had been packed with it. She pressed play. At first, it was what she expected. Emily's little voice singing off-key to some made-up song about her cat. The sound was crackly, soft, like it had faded over time. Linda smiled, tears forming in her eyes. Then, something unexpected happened. The tape cut off. Static, and then something else. A voice. Not singing. Whispering. Linda froze. She rewound it, pressed play again. There it was, faint, garbled, but not Emily's usual playful rambling. It sounded urgent. It sounded like she was talking to someone, or hiding from someone. Linda replayed it over and over, heart pounding. She couldn't make out everything, but one phrase came through clear. He's coming. Suddenly, it was as if time rewound itself. That old feeling of panic, the one Linda had buried for nearly a decade, came rushing back. Could it be that this toy, this forgotten little machine, had captured something that night? Something no one had noticed before. A final recording. A clue. She didn't want to get her hopes up, but she couldn't ignore it either. Linda called the police. 4. The first time in 9 years, detectives reopened Emily's case. The recorder was taken in for forensic audio analysis. Every second of that tape was scrutinized. Experts filtered the audio, slowed it down, adjusted frequencies. And what they found left everyone stunned because the whispering voice wasn't just Emily's. There was another voice on that tape, a deeper voice, a man's voice. He says something quiet but chilling. And when investigators matched it against a voice database, they got a hit. What followed in the days after would unravel a chilling possibility that had gone unnoticed for nearly a decade. It pointed to someone no one had suspected, someone who had been there that night. Someone who had blended in, stayed quiet, and walked free all those years. And the tape, the toy everyone thought was just a childhood keepsake, was the key to unlocking everything. But what exactly did that voice say? What did Emily capture on her toy cassette that night? And how did it survive untouched in a box for all these years? That's where this story takes a turn you won't see coming. Because the truth after all this time is far stranger and more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. Stick around, because what happens next will change the way you see this case. Forever? Back in 1991, no one could make sense of what happened to Emily Carter. She was a quiet, bright girl who loved drawing animals and making up songs. Her teachers said she was polite, a little shy, but always kind. She had no enemies, no troubled home life, and lived in a neighborhood that rarely locked its doors. It wasn't the kind of place where kids disappeared, but that's exactly what made her case so disturbing. There was no reason, no pattern, no warning. The night she vanished, there were no signs of struggle in her room. Her bed looked slept in, but the covers were folded halfway back, as if she had simply gotten up on her own. Her shoes were still by the door. Her coat was in the closet. Even her nightlight was still plugged in. Police searched every inch of the house and yard, then expanded the search to nearby woods, lakes, and abandoned buildings. Nothing. Dogs picked up a faint scent leading to the end of the driveway. And then it just stopped. Neighbors were questioned. Family members were interviewed, but no one remembered seeing or hearing anything unusual. The only odd thing was that Emily's toy cassette recorder was found on the floor, out of reach from her bed. Linda remembered leaving it on the nightstand. When she tucked Emily in, it had been her comfort object, something she'd often fall asleep talking or singing into. When the police saw it, they gave it a quick look, clicked play, heard a bit of static and music, and moved on. No one thought to really listen. Now, 9 years later, that same toy was telling a story no one had heard before. A new detective, Rachel Monroe, was assigned to look into the tape. She had grown up in the same region and remembered hearing about Emily's disappearance as a child. It was the kind of case that haunted small towns for generations. And now, listening to the filtered audio from the tape, she felt a chill crawl down her spine. There was no doubt someone else was in that room that night. A voice that didn't belong. But that raised new questions. If Emily had been whispering into the toy, was she hiding? Had she known the person? Why hadn't anyone heard anything? No. Footsteps, no doors opening. And who was the man whose voice had been recorded? Linda was called back in for questioning, not because she was a suspect, but because detectives needed every detail she could remember. She described that night again, brushing Emily's hair, reading her a story, setting her toy next to the bed. Around midnight, she thought she heard a creak in the hallway, but assumed it was just the old house settling. She never imagined it was the last time she'd see her daughter. Detective Monroe dug through the original files. She noticed something strange back in 1991. A neighbor had reported seeing a car idling a few blocks down around 1 a.m., but the tip was never followed up. The officer assigned at the time had written it off as unrelated, possibly someone on a late-night drive. Now, With fresh eyes and a possible voice recording of a man in Emily's room, that small lead took on new meaning. Meanwhile, the voice match from the toy recording had been traced to a name. Someone who had once worked on their street. A handyman. A man who had briefly done work for several homes in the neighborhood fixing gutters, replacing windows. His name hadn't come up in the original investigation because he had left town just days before the disappearance. He had no criminal record back then, no reason to raise suspicion. But now, nearly a decade later, that had changed. He was arrested for trespassing in another state just 2 years ago. And while that didn't prove anything directly connected to Emily's case, it was enough to put him back on the radar. But as Detective Monroe tried to track him down, she hit another wall. He had vanished again. No recent address, no phone records. Just gone. At the same time, Linda began going through more of Emily's things. She didn't know what she was looking for, maybe something else recorded. Another note, a clue she might have missed. She opened a faded pink diary that Emily had barely written in. Just a few pages had drawings and scribbles. But one entry stood out. It was dated just a week before she disappeared. Emily had drawn a picture of her bedroom window. Outside it, a small figure with a hat. Next to the drawing, she'd written in her uneven handwriting, "He's been watching again. Don't tell Mommy." Linda froze. She hadn't seen this before. It had been sitting in the bottom of a box for all these years. Emily had been scared, but too afraid to say anything. Linda's mind raced. Had someone been coming around more than once, watching from the shadows? Detective Monroe took the diary into evidence. It added a new layer to the timeline. If someone had been watching the house, it meant Emily's disappearance might have been planned. Not a random event, not a quick opportunity, but something more intentional. That idea chilled everyone working the case. Meanwhile, the audio from the cassette tape was sent to an FBI lab for deeper analysis. They uncovered a few more seconds that hadn't been clearly heard before. This time, it was Emily saying, "Please don't take me. I'll be quiet." Then silence. Who was she speaking to? Was she taken from her bed at knife point? Did she recognize the person? The questions grew, and answers felt just out of reach as more pieces came together. The case turned from a cold file into an active investigation again. The media caught wind of the developments, and reporters began revisiting the story. Emily's name was back in headlines. The town that had once moved on found itself holding its breath again. And Linda, after all the pain, all the years of silence, felt something she hadn't felt in so long. Movement. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, the truth was finally trying to come to the surface. But with every new answer came new danger. Because whoever had been in Emily's room that night might still be out there, watching, waiting, and determined to stay hidden. What happened next would uncover secrets no one saw coming. Secrets buried so deep they had nearly been forgotten. But the truth has a way of finding its voice even if it's through the speaker of an old, forgotten toy. Detective Monroe sat alone in her dimly lit office, the audio from Emily's toy recorder looping softly through her laptop speakers. She had listened to it over 50 times by now. Each time, the same words echoed Demilia's frightened whisper, the unidentified man's low reply, the static that followed. And each time, she hoped to catch something new. Some overlooked clue in the background, a distant sound, a floor creak, anything. But the tape gave her nothing more. Just the haunting voices from a night lost to time. She rubbed her eyes and scrolled through the old neighborhood files again. There was one name she kept circling back to: Mark Eldon, the handyman who disappeared from town days after Emily vanished. His background had holes, especially in the years before he arrived. No family connections, no strong ties. But enough jobs to stay off the radar. And now, after the recent voice match, he had disappeared again. She filed a request for older employment records, hoping to trace where he might have gone before or after 1991. The problem was, most of his work had been under the table, no contracts, no paper trail. While that lead went cold for the moment, a new one came from an unexpected place: Emily's childhood friend, Grace. Now in her 20s, Grace had reached out after seeing news reports that the case had been reopened. She said she remembered something strange, but never told anyone because she thought no one would believe her. Back then, they were only 8, and it had seemed like a dream. But she said it had haunted her ever since. Grace recalled a sleepover just 2 weeks before Emily vanished. She said they stayed up late, talking and playing with the toy recorder. At some point, Emily told her she saw someone watching her through her window a few nights before. A man in a hat. She said he would just stand there, not moving, not speaking, just staring. Emily said she'd told him to go away once, quietly through the glass, but he didn't move. Eventually, she stopped looking. When Grace asked if she told her mom, Emily just shook her head and said, "He said not to." It was something so strange, so heavy for a kid to say, that Grace hadn't known what to make of it back then. Now, it chilled her to even speak. It allowed. Detective Monroe listened carefully, scribbling down every detail. If true, it added weight to the diary entry and to Linda's vague memory of hearing a hallway creak that night. It also supported a theory the detective had quietly started developing, that Emily had been watched and groomed in some way, that her disappearance wasn't a spontaneous crime, but something calculated. But Monroe wasn't the only one chasing shadows. Linda had taken to going through Emily's old tapes again. Some were blank. Others were filled with nonsense songs, pretend interviews, the kind of things only a child would think to record. But one, buried deep in a box, caught her off guard. It was unlabeled. She pressed play and immediately felt her stomach twist. The recording was muffled, but different. There was a clear conversation happening. It wasn't playful. Emily was asking someone questions in a hushed voice. "Why do you come here? Are you going to tell Mommy? What's your name?" The replies were harder to hear, almost like they were whispered directly into the mic. But the tone was unmistakable. Gentle, controlling. Someone trying to calm her. It felt wrong. Linda brought the tape to Monroe immediately. The audio team cleaned it up as much as possible, but most of the man's replies were lost in low-frequency distortion. Still, one word did come through: special. It was said more than once. "You're special. This is our special place." It sent chills through the entire team. Meanwhile, as pressure mounted, Detective Monroe started digging into the other homes Mark Eldon had worked on during his short time in the area. That's when something strange popped up. In 1991, just 3 streets away from the Carters, a woman reported a break-in while she and her kids were asleep. Nothing was stolen, but she woke up to find her back door wide open and a muddy footprint in the hallway. The case was dismissed as a failed robbery or maybe a prank. But guess who had done window repair work for that house a month prior? Monroe. Pulled old incident reports from surrounding towns and found 2 more homes with eerily similar details. All with children. All with nothing stolen. And all within the time frame Eldon had been working nearby. None of those cases had been connected before. But now, the pattern was impossible to ignore as these threads began to twist together. Another strange development unfolded. A man claiming to be a private investigator contacted Linda. He said he had been researching unsolved missing child cases for years and had come across Emily's file. He claimed to have information but wanted to meet in person. Linda was cautious, suspicious even, but something about his voice on the phone made her agree. They met in a public cafe. He slid a small folder across the table. Inside were photographs, some old, grainy surveillance shots from a bus station. One showed a man resembling Eldon helping a young girl, maybe 9 or 10, onto a Greyhound. Another was from a gas station security cam, showing the same man months later in a different state. In both, the girl's face wasn't clear, but she had long, dark hair, much like Emily's. The man said he couldn't confirm it was her, but he believed Eldon may have moved frequently using aliases, staying just long enough in each place to not draw attention. He handed Linda a final photo, newer, clearer. It was of a community shelter in northern Idaho. On the steps stood a woman in her 20s with soft features and dark eyes. Some locals say she doesn't talk much, the investigator said. She showed up 6 years ago. No ID, no history. Just appeared. Linda held the photo for a long time. Could it be? Could Emily be alive? But Monroe remained cautious. It wasn't proof, just another piece in a growing, tangled puzzle. A woman with no history could be anyone, or it could be a cruel coincidence. What no one knew yet was that Eldon's name had turned up again in a different form. He had used another alias to apply for construction permits in a rural part of Montana 2 years prior. The company, no longer existed, but the paper trail was just enough to give Monroe a new lead. The location was remote, isolated, and no one from the area remembered much about the man who had passed through. But one resident mentioned a girl, quiet, seemed afraid of everyone, left just as suddenly as she came. It was like chasing a ghost. Back in her small home, Linda sat at Emily's old desk, staring at the diary and the newest tape. Her hands rested on the toy recorder, now worn and fragile with time. She wondered how long that little device had been holding answers. How many nights Emily had whispered into it, hoping someone would hear. The guilt never left her. The what-ifs. The nights she dreamed her daughter was still somewhere out there, waiting. Somewhere, maybe, she still was. But time was running out. And the person who took her, who had been careful, patient, hidden, was still one step ahead. Detective Monroe drove through the winding roads of northern Idaho, her eyes flicking between the GPS and the dense pine trees pressing in on either side. The photo of the young woman at the shelter stayed folded in her coat pocket. She'd looked at it so many times she could sketch it from memory. There was something about the eyes. Even after 9 years, they looked like Emily's. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to make her come all this way. The town was small, just a grocery store, a gas station, and a diner. Monroe kept her badge in her pocket, choosing to ask questions casually at first. She showed the photo of the woman to the diner waitress, who blinked, then leaned in. "She works out at that old feed store," the woman said. "Doesn't talk much. Folks say she keeps to herself. Sweet, but nervous, like she's always waiting for something bad to happen." Monroe's chest tightened. She asked for directions and didn't stop to eat. The closer she got, the more her thoughts raced. If this was Emily, then the whole case, the years of grief, the dead ends, the silence might finally make sense. But if it wasn't, she didn't know how she'd tell Linda. Meanwhile, back home, Linda sat alone in her kitchen, the toy cassette recorder sitting in front of her like it always did now. The latest tape, the one with the strange conversation, had been playing on her mind non-stop. She kept thinking about Emily's questions, the strange, calm voice that answered her. And something about the word special kept her up at night. It didn't sound like comfort. It sounded like control. Linda had also received a call that morning from a man she hadn't heard from in years, her ex-husband, Daniel. After Emily disappeared, their marriage didn't survive. He had moved across the state, remarried, tried to build a new life, but the news had reached him. He wanted to help now. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was just time. He asked if she'd let him come. "Bye," she agreed, though something in her gut was uneasy. They hadn't spoken in so long, and he had never shown much interest in revisiting the past before. Why now? Detective Monroe reached the feed store by mid-afternoon. It was old, the paint chipping, the front porch leaning a little. A bell rang. As she stepped inside, a man at the register gave her a quick nod, then pointed to the back when she showed him the photos. "She's in the storage room." Shelving stock, Monroe stepped carefully through the narrow aisles. The smell of hay and rusted metal filled the air. She turned the corner and saw her. The young woman was crouched beside a bag of seed, her dark hair falling across her face. As she worked, Monroe's breath caught. "Emily," she said softly. The woman froze. Slowly, she looked up. Her eyes met Monroe's. There was something in them: fear, confusion, and something else. Recognition. Monroe didn't reach for her badge yet. She just held the photo up and asked gently, "Is this you?" The woman didn't answer, but her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. And then, out of nowhere, the store manager appeared behind Monroe. "You looking for her?" he said, smiling too wide. "She don't talk much. Been with us a few years now." The woman looked down again, her shoulders tense. Monroe noticed her fingers were trembling. Later that night, Linda opened her front door to find Daniel standing there, holding an old photo of Emily in one hand and an envelope in the other. He looked older, worn down, but calm. "I found something," he said. "Something I think you need to see." They sat at the table, just like they used to. He slid the envelope across to her. Inside was a faded receipt. A motel. From 1991, dated 2 days after Emily disappeared. The room had been paid for in cash, but the signature matched Daniel's handwriting. Linda stared at it. "I never knew how to explain it," he said. "I left for a few days. I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't hurt her, I swear to you, but I think someone followed me. Someone I hired to do work on the house." Linda's hands went cold. "You hired him," she whispered. "He wasn't a stranger. I met him through a friend. Just needed help patching the roof, and I was in a hurry. I gave him a key." Linda pushed back from the table, suddenly unsteady. "You gave him a key." Daniel looked down, ashamed. "I didn't think anything of it. He was always around the neighborhood, quiet, friendly, I thought. I didn't think he'd do anything." Monroe stood outside the feed store long after the sun had set. The woman had refused to give her name. She said she didn't remember much from before she was 10. Said her earliest memory was waking up in a small trailer in Montana. She said the man who raised her told her not to talk about her past, said it would bring danger. She believed him for years. She didn't even know if her name had ever been. Emily Monroe had sent fingerprints to the lab. It would take 24 hours to confirm. But deep down, she already knew. That night, as Monroe drove to the small motel where she planned to stay, she passed a gas station with an old security camera mounted above the door. Something clicked. She pulled in and walked to the counter, asking if they kept old recordings. The clerk laughed. "We don't even keep good coffee, but we do have some backups from a few months back." "Why?" Monroe explained that she was looking for someone, an older man who may have come through recently. The clerk hesitated, then nodded. "Actually, yeah, there was a guy. Quiet, tall, looked around a lot, said he was meeting someone. We had payphones." Monroe's pulse quickened. He'd leave a name. Nope, but he bought a prepaid phone. Paid cash. She asked for the timestamp on the sale, got a copy of the footage. The man's face was partially turned, wearing a hat. But Monroe recognized the JAWLINE. It was him, the man from the toy recorder. Detective Monroe barely slept that night. The face on the grainy security footage haunted her, even though it wasn't fully clear. She knew it was him, Mark Eldon, or whatever name he was using now. The voice from the tape, the man in Emily's room. the shadow that had slipped through every crack in the case. He had been right there, buying a prepaid phone, standing under a blinking fluorescent light like just another customer. It meant he was watching. He knew they were getting close. The next morning, Monroe received the call she'd been waiting on. The fingerprint match had come back. The young woman working at the feed store, the one who wouldn't say her name, was confirmed to be Emily Carter, alive, 9 years missing, and now finally found. But the relief that should have followed never came, because when Monroe called to check on her, Emily was gone. She hadn't shown up for work. Her small room above the store had been left unlocked, her few belongings untouched. Her boots were missing. The bed was made. The store manager claimed he hadn't seen her leave, but Monroe didn't believe him. Something about his eyes told her more than his words ever could. He was nervous, sweating despite the cold. She wondered how much he really knew. Had he been helping her or helping someone else? Meanwhile, Linda sat alone at her kitchen table with the motel receipt still in front of her. Her hands trembled as she turned it over for the 100th time. She couldn't stop thinking about Daniel, about how he'd admitted giving the man a key all those years ago, about how casually he'd handed that information over like it hadn't. Shattered everything she thought she knew. And the more she thought about it, the more something started to gnaw at her. There was one memory she kept trying to ignore. A night in early 1991, before Emily disappeared. Linda had come home late from her sister's and found Daniel asleep on the couch, and Emily wasn't in bed. She was sitting on the floor, holding that recorder, talking to someone on the tape. When Linda asked who it was, Emily had said, "Just pretending." But now she wasn't sure. What if she hadn't been pretending? What if she'd been recording something real? Monroe returned to the motel where the prepaid phone had been purchased. She asked about recent guests, and the clerk mentioned a man who'd checked in 2 nights ago. Paid cash, no ID. He'd left early that morning right after. The news report confirming Emily was alive. Monroe asked to see the room. The bed was made, the bathroom clean. But on the small table near the window, a plastic toy sat by itself, a red and yellow cassette recorder. It was old, faded, nearly identical to Emily's, but this one had no tape inside. Just a note. It read, "She still talks to me." Monroe felt her blood run cold. This wasn't over. It was a message, a warning, maybe even a threat. He knew they were listening, and now he wanted them to know he was still in control. As the investigation deepened, another twist emerged, this one from a nearby county's cold case unit. An agent contacted Monroe about a girl who had vanished in 1993 from a town just 2 hours away. Similar age, similar look. Also disappeared from her bedroom without a trace. The case had gone cold quickly. But what made it relevant now was that in her room, investigators had found a red plastic toy recorder. They hadn't thought much of it at the time. It had been considered just another toy. But now the pattern was undeniable. There wasn't just one victim. Emily may have been the first, or at least the first they knew about, but she wasn't. The last. Monroe worked through every similar file within the tri-state area. Girls, ages 7 to 10, gone without a trace between 1991 and 1997. Most cases were disconnected. Some never even made headlines. But the more she mapped them, the clearer it became. There was a pattern in the shadows. And then came the second shock. The voice on Emily's tape, the one they had tentatively matched to Mark Eldon, was matched again. But not just to him. Another sample flagged it too. A match from a 1994 interrogation. Recording of a man who had been arrested for stalking in a different state. The case had been dropped, charges dismissed. But the voice print was saved. That man. He had used the name Thomas Gray. No fingerprints. On file, no social security number. Just a voice. which meant Eldon wasn't his real name, and neither was Gray. Whoever he was, he had been hiding in plain sight for over a decade, moving between towns, changing names, working just long enough to blend in. And in each place, a girl would vanish, leaving almost nothing behind except a trail of unanswered questions, and if they were lucky, a broken toy cassette recorder. But what shook Monroe the most was the realization that this man wasn't just some shadowy figure working alone. Someone had been helping him, maybe knowingly, maybe not. And the one person who kept popping up in records close to every single location, every town, every year was Daniel, Linda's ex-husband. Every time she moved, every time she changed her phone number or address, Daniel had found a reason to call, visit. He said it was about closure, about regret. But what if it was about keeping tabs? What if he hadn't just given Eldon a key? What if he'd kept a connection with him all along? That night, Linda found herself going through her old answering machine tapes. Most were blank or full of static. But one from years ago had a message she hadn't played in a long time. A deep voice. Calm. Careful. She's safe. She's special. You'll understand one day. She had never known who left it. She had assumed it was a cruel prank. But now, it sounded far too familiar. And in that moment, Linda realized something horrifying. It wasn't just that Emily had been taken. It was that someone close had made sure she stayed gone. Someone who had never truly left. And now, the past wasn't just catching up, was crashing through the front door. Detective Monroe sat in her car parked outside Linda's house, staring down at the new case file in her hands. The photo on the front was of Daniel Carter, younger than he looked now, standing beside the man once known as Mark Eldon, now confirmed through voiceprint and circumstantial evidence to be Thomas Gray. The file connected them more directly than ever before. A witness, recently located in Montana, swore he saw both men together in 1992, staying at a roadside motel with a little girl. That was a year after Emily disappeared. Monroe's gut had been right all along. Daniel had lied more than once. And now, everything pointed back to him. Inside the house, Linda replayed the voicemail one more time, her fingers trembling over the old answering machine. She knew that voice now. It was Gray's, the same cold, steady tone that had haunted the tapes, the same voice that had told Emily she was special. But what froze her wasn't just the voice, was the second click in the background, the faint rustle and a soft, familiar sigh. She rewound again. This time, she listened. Closer, it was Daniel. Breathing in the background, Linda's mind spun. Everything she'd believed, every word Daniel had said about wanting to help, about regretting the past, it had all been a performance. Not only had he handed over the key all those years ago, he had stayed in contact with Gray afterward. Maybe even helped hide Emily. Maybe more. Just then, her phone rang. It was Monroe. "I need you to stay inside," Monroe said urgently. "I'm coming over right now. Don't open the door for anyone, not even Daniel." But Linda wasn't alone. She turned, slowly, as Daniel stepped from the hallway into the kitchen, his expression unreadable. He was holding something small in his hand, the recorder. Emily's toy. He'd picked it up off the table when she wasn't looking. "I didn't want you to find that old tape," he said softly. "I should have gotten rid of it years ago." Linda's throat tightened. "What did you do?" Daniel looked down at the toy in his hand, turning it over like he was seeing it for the first time. "I didn't plan for any of it," he muttered. "At first, it was just about control, about fixing things. Then he came along. Gray. He saw something in Emily, said she was special, said she needed to be protected from the world. I didn't think he'd actually take her. I swear." Linda backed up, inching toward the back door. But you knew where she was. All this time, I thought she was safe. He sent quickly. He sent pictures, letters. She was clean, fed, quiet. Not hurt, just different. Before Linda could respond, the door burst open behind her and Monroe entered, gun drawn. Daniel froze, his hand still holding the recorder. "Put it down," Monroe said firmly. "Step away." Daniel hesitated, then slowly placed the recorder on the table. But his eyes never left Linda's. "She wouldn't have come back if you hadn't pushed," he said bitterly. "She had a new life. We gave her that." "You took her life," Linda snapped, her voice shaking. "You took everything." That moment unraveled years of silence. Daniel was arrested on the spot. In his truck, investigators found a second burner phone with text messages to an unlisted number traced to a cabin 2 hours away, deep in the Idaho woods. Monroe and a tactical team moved quickly. When they reached the cabin, it was already empty. But there were signs someone had been there recently. Dishes in the sink, a cot still warm. And in the corner, a weathered suitcase packed with drawings. Childlike handwriting and several tapes, some labeled E, others unlabeled, but clearly recorded by a young voice. Monroe picked one up and slid it into the player found nearby. The tape clicked, then a pause. Then Emily's voice, older now, tired. "If someone finds this, I remember my name, my real name. I'm Emily Carter." Her voice cracked, but she went on. "He said I was special, but I wasn't. I was just scared." Monroe felt tears prick her eyes. They were so close. Emily had been here. One of the newer drawings in the suitcase showed a mountain range with a small building sketched at the base. In the corner, a note. "Safe now. Different name. No more hiding." It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to confirm Emily had escaped again. 2 days later, they located her just outside Spokane, Washington. She had checked into a small women's shelter under the name Ellie Grant. When Monroe arrived, she found a woman sitting in the corner of the common room, a blanket around her shoulders and a tape recorder in her lap. Emily looked up slowly. Recognition flickered in her eyes. "I knew you'd come," she said quietly. The reunion was cautious, gentle. Linda arrived the next day. The moment was silent at first. Just two people looking at each other through the thick fog of 9 missing years. Then Emily stepped forward. Linda broke. They didn't say much. Words didn't come easy. But the embrace said everything. Daniel remained in custody, facing multiple charges. Grafe, that was even his real name, remained on the run. But his network was crumbling. His trail, once cold, was now burning under every step, and Emily's testimony would be the key to finally ending it. But just when the case seemed to be settling, Monroe received a sealed envelope at her office. No return address. Inside was a single photo. A child asleep in bed with a toy recorder on her pillow. A shadow stood by the window, and on the back, just one line. "She talks to me now." It wasn't over. Not yet. The moment Linda stepped outside with Emily, the sun felt warmer than it had in years. It wasn't just the weather, it was the weight that had lifted. Emily clutched her mother's hand tightly, her eyes darting around like the world was still, unfamiliar. But this time, she wasn't alone. They were together, and that was what mattered most. The pain hadn't vanished. The years hadn't been erased. But they were no longer defined by silence or fear. Now, they had a new beginning. Detective Monroe stayed behind at the shelter, watching from a distance as mother and daughter reunited. In the quiet morning light, she'd worked many cases before, but this one had changed her. The layers of betrayal, the twisted trust. The years of Miss Cluzette all underscored how even in the most peaceful towns, darkness could settle in. Unseen, Monroe had chased ghosts for months, and while she had finally found the heart of the mystery, one thing still remained out there. Thomas Graymark, Eldenor, whatever name he went by now, was still missing. His face was added to federal wanted lists. His voice, now distinct and infamous, was sent to law enforcement agencies across the country. The envelope he had sent, the one with the picture of a new child, and the message "she talks to me now," was under forensic review. Experts believed the photo had been staged, possibly even fabricated. It was meant to provoke, to scare, to show he still had power. But Monroe saw it for what it really was: desperation. He was losing control, and he knew it. His network had unraveled. His safe houses were exposed. He could run, but not for long. Meanwhile, Daniel Carter was formally charged with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and child endangerment. As investigators dug deeper into his past, more connections to gray surface bank transfers, motel receipts, even letters with coded language that took weeks to decode. What became clear was that Daniel hadn't just stood by. He had helped. Maybe not from the start, but long enough to do irreversible damage. In court, he claimed he thought Emily was safer away from the world, that Gray had convinced him. The world was too dangerous for someone special like her. The jury didn't buy it. He was sentenced to 25 years without parole. Back at home, Linda and Emily tried to rebuild something resembling a life. Emily, now in her late teens, moved cautiously. She had lost so much time, childhood, friendships, the simplicity of normal life, but she hadn't lost herself. With therapy and support, she began to speak more openly about what happened. She revealed that the man who took her never called himself by a real name. He simply said he was a friend. He told her her parents had given her up, and for a long time, she believed it. She was moved from place to place, homeschooled in secrecy, taught that speaking out would bring harm to her and anyone she trusted. But something inside her, some small instinct, kept telling her that wasn't the full truth. So she began leaving pieces of herself behind. Tapes, drawings, clues, hoping someone would find them one day. Her courage became the key to unlocking the case as Emily settled into her new reality. She began using her experience to help others. She volunteered with support groups for missing and exploited youth, sometimes even speaking to small groups when she was ready. Her story, once hidden in static and whispers, became a light for others lost in their own darkness. She didn't call herself a survivor, she called herself a fighter, and people listened. Detective Monroe continued working closely with the FBI on other cold cases that now seemed connected to the same man. From the tapes, the voice recordings, and the overlapping timelines, they believed Gray had been active for over 15 years, moving from state to state, changing names, taking children under the radar. But Emily's voice, her recordings, had cracked his pattern wide open. The toy recorder, the one Emily had used all those years ago, was now sealed in an evidence box, marked with a note, recovered from Carter residence, 1991. Audio key. To case, Monroe had kept a copy of the tape. Sometimes she'd listen to it again, not out of curiosity, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the smallest voice carries the biggest truth. One afternoon, a reporter asked Emily if she hated the man who took her. She thought about it for a long time before answering. "I don't hate him," she said. "I hate what he made me believe, that I was alone, that I didn't matter, but I survived. I came back. And now he doesn't get to control my story." Her words echoed far beyond that interview. Linda, for the first time in years, felt like a mother again. Not the broken shell of one, waiting for answers that never came, but a mother who could look her daughter in the eye and say, "I'm here. I never stopped looking." They had quiet dinners, late-night talks, and long walks where words weren't always needed. They just needed each other. The community that once whispered about the Carter family came together in a new way. Neighbors, who had once avoided eye contact, now reached out, bringing meals, sending letters, offering help. People who had long dismissed the story as just one of those tragedies now stood in quiet awe of Emily's strength. And as for Monroe, she never stopped searching. Every lead, every whisper of a sighting, she followed it, because she knew Gray was still out there. But now, he was the one hiding. Now, he was the one afraid. In the final interview Emily gave, she said something simple that stuck with everyone who heard it. "Monsters are real," she said, "but they don't win not if we keep looking for the truth." And that was the heart of it. This wasn't just a story about a girl who vanished from her bed in 1991. It was about the power of a voice, even when it's almost too quiet to hear. It was about a mother's refusal to let go, a detective who wouldn't quit, a truth buried in static finally breaking through. And even though the man behind it all had escaped for now, his time was running out. Because the world was listening. And this time, it wasn't just to the whispers, it was to the truth.